Welcome. And we're looking for a murder victim, which was a brutal murder. And here's her name right here. Boy, let me tell you, she was hard to find in the cemetery. All these sections, lots, divisions, gardens. It was a disaster, but I did find it. I had to get help. It was where I thought it was, but I was surprised at what it was. So we're going to tell you the story about Josephine, who was brutally murdered in Porter County, Indiana, on a road they called back then Mosquito Town Road. So let's walk through and I'll show you her grave.
On the afternoon of April 26, 1925, Chesterton area residents Frank J. Cook and Fred A. Rue struck out in Rue's automobile to go hunting for mushrooms in the northeastern portion of Westchester Township in Porter County, Indiana. That Sunday, as Rue drove along Mosquito Town Road, present-day County Road 1400 North, his companion Cook noticed an odd-looking object along the road that appeared somewhat charred. Cook gave little thought to what he had just seen, and the two mushroom hunters proceeded on to collect nature's bounty. Curiosity regarding what he had seen along the road, however, ate away at Cook's mind while combing the woodlands for mushrooms. When the pair was traveling back to Chesterton, Cook asked that Rue drive more slowly as they passed the location where Cook thought he had seen a burnt object earlier that day. As they approached, they stopped at the object Cook saw and discovered that it was the charred remains of a young woman. The remains were found at a point near the west corner of the Center Farm field, on the August Herman Polensky farm, between County Road 200 East and Brummett Road. Immediately upon their gruesome discovery, Cook and Rue drove into Chesterton and reported what they had seen to local physician Dr. Charles O. Wiltfong. Wiltfong then conveyed the information to the Porter County coroner, Dr. Allen O. Dobbins, and Deputy Sheriff William D. Pennington. The news of the body discovered on Mosquito Town Road spread rapidly, and soon a crowd rushed to the site. The April 30th, 1925 issue of the Chesterton Tribune described the scene in detail.
The body lay when discovered face down, with one hand bent under the face. One arm was burned off at the elbow, and both limbs below the knee were gone, the bones looking as though they had been hacked or broken off. The torso was badly charred, but the flesh of the back and the flesh of one hand had escaped the flames. 2 bullets had been fired into the back of the head of the victim, and these made holes probably an inch in diameter and 8 or 10 inches deep in the ground. These holes were filled with blood. Both bullets were recovered by Deputy Sheriff Pennington. Both were shot from a .38 Special. One was steel-jacketed and the other copper-jacketed. This evidence convinced the coroner that the woman had been killed on the spot where she lay. Near the body was an empty 5-gallon can, which had once been used to hold Polarine oil. It is supposed that the can was filled with either kerosene or gasoline, and the contents had been used to burn the body. Little of the clothing had escaped the flames. A piece of lining from a coat sleeve was left. Around the neck of the victim was a string of glass beads. The coat worn by the woman had a fur neck piece, and this protected, in a measure, the back of the head. Laying on the ground was also found the remains of a vanity case, 2 eyeglasses that had dropped out of their holder, the wires that held them together, and a burned pocketbook. The face was burned so that identification would be impossible. Indications were that the legs of the victim had been hacked off. No signs of shoes were found. Some bones were found about 10 feet from where the body lay. Near the body was found the charred remains of a copy of Saturday's issue of the Gary Post-Tribune and a Pennsylvania Railroad employee's card. On the railroad card, the name had been obliterated. It stated in print, Northwest Region Pennsylvania Railroad, and below this was written in ink, number 1032.
Given evidence at the scene, investigators quickly determined that the murderer or murderers drove to the remote location to kill the woman. Their automobile was driven from the east, and for a few hundred feet, ran along the north edge of the road with the passenger side wheels rolling through the grass. The tires on the automobile were thought to be Goodyear balloon cord tires. The automobile stopped and the victim was apparently pushed out of the vehicle, falling face downward, and then shot twice in the head. It was later learned at an autopsy conducted by Coroner Dobbins that the woman had also been stabbed in the heart. Here's a composite sample of headlines from April and May 1925 concerning the murder victim found on Mosquito Town Road. Residents in the surrounding area reported that they had heard gunshots between 4 and 5 in the morning of April 26th, and it was believed that the bullets from those gunshots killed the victim. Within a week, the dead woman was identified as Josephine Desiderio, a resident of Gary Lake County, Indiana. Here is the approximate location where the remains of Josephine Gennaro Desiderio were discovered by Frank Cook and Fred Rua on April 26, 1925. The east-west road next to the arrow is present-day County Road 1400 North. Initially, there was considerable confusion as to the identity of the murder victim. One issue confounding the quick identification was the amount of destruction and disfiguring the fire had caused to the body. Newspapers across the Midwest and beyond were reporting the story, but had no name to associate with the unfortunate victim. As a result, numerous individuals across several states were stating that they believed the body to be that of a young woman they knew who had mysteriously gone missing. The remains were removed by authorities to the undertaking room of Chesterton mortician Hallard A. Flynn. Here, it was reported, more than 2,000 people came to view the young woman's body. Most of these people were curiosity seekers, but several had purposely traveled to Flynn's morgue to determine if they could identify the woman's body as being that of a missing friend or relative. On May 2nd, James A. Brown of Fort Wayne, Allen County, Indiana, stated that the body had a strong resemblance to his missing niece, Mabel B. Walls Miller, age 23. Brown reported that Mabel had married Ellsworth C. Miller 2 years earlier and that they frequently quarreled with one another. Ellsworth informed Brown that Mabel has been missing since April 6th, but believed that she had gone to Columbus, Franklin County, Ohio, where he believed she may have drowned. Brown told Porter County authorities that Mabel had worn shoes similar to the one found near the body by a search dog. Closer to the scene of the crime, Michigan City resident Artianeka L. Hostler said she was absolutely certain that the remains in Flynn's morgue were those of Mary Berg, age 22, her daughter and the wife of a railroad employee. Upon investigation, however, Mary was found to be alive and well and living in Danville, Vermilion County, Illinois. Meanwhile, Frank Kokorek, a former Army butcher, was arrested in Chicago after an acquaintance, William Littleton, informed police that Kokorek had threatened to kill his wife. During interrogation, Kokorek initially told investigators that the Mosquito Town Road woman might be his wife, but then he produced a letter from his wife dated May 12th, saying that she was returning to her home in Detroit. Newspapers reported that Kokorek was hysterical after several hours of interrogation and frequently became incoherent. He was later released when no connection could be made between Kokorek and the body found in Porter County. Raymond Sweeney, a railroad engineer, was taken into custody twice in connection with the murder. Later, it was established that the woman declared by 3 witnesses to resemble the mutilated remains and to be the wife of Sweeney was alive in Farina, Fayette County, Illinois. Several pieces of evidence were gathered at the crime scene and from the remains that allowed detectives in the case to positively identify the body. Evidence included a gold vanity case found at the crime scene, remnants of a coat and undergarment found on the victim, a slipper-like shoe discovered near the body, and characteristics of the body itself, most notably the victim's teeth. Circumstantial evidence gathered from individuals allowed investigators to tie these pieces of physical evidence to a possible perpetrator of the murder. 2 individuals were especially important in the identification of the remains. Florence Boto, a 16-year-old companion of Josephine Desiderio, who at the time was using the alias Florence Kish, testified at a coroner's inquest about evidence that was discovered and her relationship with the presumed victim. Florence was able to positively identify the coat that the victim was wearing was her own, and that she had allowed Josephine to borrow it. In addition, she stated that when she had last met Josephine that her friend was not wearing any underskirt, and that she gave her a silk underskirt of her own that she identified as being the one worn by the victim found on Mosquitotown Road. Finally, Florence indicated that the teeth on the body were the same as Josephine's. The upper teeth had a distinctive gap. There was a noticeable overbite, and the teeth were in excellent condition, with no signs of decay. Bodo's testimony concerning the unseemly life of Josephine Desiderio was quite sensational. She related Josephine's estranged relationship with her husband Louis, and that Josephine had developed numerous intimate relationships with men in the Chicago, Gary, and South Bend areas. Thus, several of Josephine's lovers could potentially be the murderer, and each were being investigated by the detectives assigned to the case. Many newspapers ran the story of Josephine's scandalous life on their front pages. The May 1st issue of the Logan Sport Pharos Tribune contained the following statement.
She was a woman of many loves, the object of many lady of the evening toasts in Gary's fervid nightlife, and it was her penciled sick notation of spots of rendezvous which identified the newest murder victim of the Indiana Dunes as Josephine Desiderio of Gary.
Similarly, the May 1st issue of the Daily Independent, published in Murfreesboro, Jackson County, Illinois, included the following under its front page headline, "Sand Dunes Victim Was a Love Woman."
Police, backtracking on the trails of her loves, sought today to trace the hand that drove steel through her heart, sent pistol bullets through her brain, and all but blotted out identification. Her husband Louis is missing. The police know him as a bootlegger and the habitual toter sick of a pistol. They know of him as passionately and insanely jealous of his butterfly wife, whose mass of bobbed brown hair and twinkling blue eyes and fast dancing feet brought smiles of a dozen men whose names the police have learned.
Investigators homed in on one particular person who was known to have had a recent intimate relationship with Josephine, a man named Sam Rossi. Sam had resided with Josephine in a Gary hotel for about 20 days prior to her disappearance. The Porter County Sheriff was quick to find and put Rossi into custody as a material witness. Florence Bodo was also taken into custody for a brief time as a material witness. Under oath at the coroner's inquest, Rossi detailed his relationship with Josephine, identified the remains as Josephine's by the appearance of the teeth, and stated that he was familiar with the gold vanity case that was found at the scene and knew it to be hers. He also had an alibi that clearly established that he could not have killed Josephine. At the coroner's inquest, Florence testified that Josephine was the mother of 3 children. 2 children lived at home with her husband Louis, while an infant resided with Josephine's parents. One finding from the autopsy was that the victim was either pregnant or had recently given birth. Later, Coroner Dobbins stated that the body found on Mosquitotown Road may have never borne children. Given the extensive damage to the body and nearly complete destruction to the abdomen and lower extremities by the fire, as reported in several newspapers, the coroner may have had an impossible task in making a definitive conclusion. Birth certificates exist for at least 3 of Josephine's children, however, indicating that she had indeed given birth to children. Bernardo Gennaro, Josephine's father and a Gary grocer, was a bit uncertain as to whether the remains were those of his daughter. However, examination of the victim's teeth led him to believe that the body was indeed Josephine's. Coroner Dobbins released the body on Saturday, May 9th, and that same day undertaker John Oleska from Gary arrived to take the body for burial. Josephine was buried that evening in Gary's Oak Hill Cemetery in Plot B36. No religious ceremony was held. In a rather strange twist, the Gennaros did not sign a deposition that stated that the body was indeed that of Josephine, but they did provide a receipt for the acceptance of the body and provided proof that the body had been buried. Coroner Dobbins signed a death certificate for Josephine Desiderio on the day she was buried. Dobbins indicates that Josephine came to her death at 4 a.m. on April 26, 1925. The coroner's inquest determined that the cause of death was homicidal, knife wound in chest and gunshot wound in head. Investigation by Coroner Dobbins and Porter County Sheriff William B. Forney gathered additional evidence, and a grand jury was impaneled by Judge Hannibal H. Loring in the Porter Circuit Court in Valparaiso. The foreman of the grand jury was Valparaiso resident George Freeman Beach. The other members of the grand jury included Porter County residents Arthur O. Carpenter, Boone Township, Amos J. Casbin, Boone Township, George J. Drazer, Pleasant Township, Charles Fuller, Chesterton, and Clara M. Kirkpatrick, Valparaiso. The evidence and testimony provided at the coroner's inquest was also presented to the grand jury, as well as new details concerning Josephine's husband, Louis Desiderio. For instance, it was learned that 5 months prior to Josephine's murder, that her husband had beaten her. She had obtained a $500 peace bond similar to a temporary restraining order to keep Louis away from her. The peace bond was still in force when Josephine was killed. In addition, there was testimony from more than one witness that Louis had threatened to kill Josephine a week before she was found dead on Mosquito Town Road. The most damning fact pointing to Louis's involvement in Josephine's death is that he could not be found after April 26th. He simply disappeared. The totality of the evidence and testimony led the grand jury to indict Louis Desiderio with the first-degree murder of his wife, Josephine. Police in Northwest Indiana and Chicago were now hunting for Louis to bring him to justice. Some had doubts as to Louis's guilt. Captain William Lynn of the Gary Police Department, for example, was quoted in several newspapers stating that Louis Desiderio may not be the man who killed her, but Louis knows of her comings and goings, and her friends and haunts in the white light resorts of the whole country. He may be able to clear himself of all suspicion by showing whose hate or whose passion might have inspired the killing. Alternatively, Captain Lynn may have made such a statement as a ploy to persuade Louis to turn himself in for questioning. It should be noted that within a week of the murder, and soon after preliminary identification of the remains as being those of Josephine Desiderio, 2 of Louis's brothers and a cousin, Claude A. Farini, were taken into custody by the Chicago Police Department. These men denied knowing the whereabouts of Louis and also stated that they had opposed his marriage to Josephine. They were soon released. Who was Louis Desiderio? Louis Desiderio was born Luigi Desiderio to Andrew and Maria Ferretta Desiderio on July 15, 1891, at Celano, Italy, a small town located approximately 75 miles directly east of Rome in central Italy. Nothing is known of Luigi's childhood, but it is known that he set sail for America on the SS Niagara from Le Havre, France, and arrived at New York City on July 23, 1912. The passenger manifest for the ship lists him as 21 years old, traveling alone, in good health, standing 5 feet 7 inches in height, chestnut hair, brown complexion, and brown eyes. Luigi's final destination is listed in the manifest as Gary, Indiana, where a brother was living. 9 passengers on the SS Niagara, including Luigi, were detained for further investigation before being released by immigration officials. The immigration record shows that the cause for Luigi's detention was LPC 310. The acronym LPC represents likely to become a public charge, which meant that there were reasons for the immigration officials to believe that Luigi would not be able to support himself financially, or perhaps there were medical or mental conditions present that would require public intervention. Luigi was detained for 3 days, being released on July 26 at 4 p.m. Soon after his arrival to America, Luigi Desiderio can be found residing at 1610 Madison Street in Gary, Indiana, with Fiorentino, also known as Fiore, Frank, and Rico Desiderio. All 4 were employed as laborers for the American Sheet and Tin Plate Company. Historical records dated between 1912 and 1918 reveal that Luigi used the names Luigi, Louis, Louis, and Luis interchangeably. By 1918, Luigi was residing at 2005 Broadway Avenue in Gary, near his brother Fiore's automobile parts supply business. He enlisted in the United States Army on May 25, 1918. While in the Army, he filed a petition for naturalization at the United District Court of Kentucky at Louisville, and took the oath of allegiance to the United States on July 20, 1918. The court order admitting Luigi as an American citizen was signed the same day he took the oath. This order also legally changed his given name from Luigi to Louis. Hereafter, records reveal that he always, without deviation, used the name Louis when providing identification. At the time of his naturalization, Louis Desiderio was a U.S. Army private in the 60th Company of the 15th Battalion, 159th Depot Brigade, at Camp Zachary Taylor in Louisville. This military processing facility trained soldiers for combat during the Great War. It is believed, however, that Louis's company never traveled over the Atlantic Ocean to battle for the Allies in Europe. Louis was mustered out of U.S. Army service on January 10, 1919, and returned to Gary. Soon after his return, he ran afoul of the law. On October 7 and 13, 1919, he was tried in a criminal case, case number 752, State versus Louis Desiderio, at Crown Point, Lake County, Indiana. Though the particular details of the case are unknown, when he became an American citizen in 1931, his name was changed by order of the U.S. District Court in Chicago to Fred Desiderio, though he had been using the given name of Fred for many years. Louis can then be found in 1921 operating a soft drinks business at 425 East 6th Street in Michigan City, LaPorte County, Indiana, approximately 5 blocks east of the present-day Lighthouse Place Outlet Mall. Thus, it can be assumed that Louis had some familiarity with the roads between Gary and Michigan City. On May 31, 1921, Louis married Josephine Gennari in Lake County, Indiana. Howard H. Kemp, a justice of the peace, officiated their marriage. Numerous spellings of Josephine's surname exist in various records. It is believed that Gennaro is the correct spelling of Josephine's surname. Some additional insight concerning Louis Desiderio can be gleaned from newspaper articles published at the time of Josephine's murder. As alluded to earlier, Louis had run afoul of the law prior to Josephine's demise. One newspaper account states that Louis is well known to Gary police and formerly conducted a garage in Gary. He was suspected as offense for stolen automobiles. Louis had also testified as an alibi witness in the Lake County trial of Nicola Triculia, who was later convicted as an accessory in the armed robbery of the First State Bank of Tolston on June 14, 1919. Tolston is a neighborhood in Gary. Sadly, Herman William Euchre, the cashier at the Tolston Bank, who was also a member of the Gary Board of Education, was murdered in the commission of this crime. Prior to the bank robbery, the 7 individuals involved in it were, like Louis, well known by Gary police since they were trafficking in stolen automobiles. One of the men was a former Gary police officer. 4 of these 7 men were sentenced to death for the murder of Euchre, though all had their sentences later commuted to life terms upon retrial in the Porter Superior Court of Judge Harry L. Crumpacker. Brothers Albert and Tom Batchelor of Valparaiso were 2 of these 4 men. As is evident, Louis did not keep the best of company. Louis Desiderio did not simply vanish. A search through various databases slowly began to uncover Louis's whereabouts after the murder of Josephine. He apparently did not assume an alias. The first clue uncovered as to where Louis could be located appeared in a World War II draft registration card completed April 27, 1942. His card reveals that he was residing at 383 Essex Street in Lynn, Essex County, Massachusetts. His employer at the time was Happy Valley Cabins, located at 480 Broadway in Saugus, also in Essex County. Grudo Lazzi, residing at 12 Rock Valley Street in Everett, Middlesex County, Massachusetts, is listed as Louis's primary contact. A 1942 city directory for Lynn, Massachusetts, lists Louis's occupation as a maintenance man at Happy Valley Cabins. Louis is described in his World War II draft registration card as being white, of ruddy complexion, 5 feet 7 inches in height, weighing 180 pounds, with black-gray hair and brown eyes. Listed as obvious physical characteristic that will aid in identification was a scar over left eyebrow. Most importantly, the date and location of birth provided on the card matches his 1918 naturalization documents. Thus, Louis could be pinned to Massachusetts in 1942. Additional research focusing on Massachusetts uncovered some startling facts. In 1927, 2 years after Josephine's murder, Louis had married Elvira Lazzi in Everett, Massachusetts. They appear in the Everett, Massachusetts marriage records in Volume 15, page 97. What makes this marriage a bit remarkable is that it is known for certain that a very active search for Louis Desiderio, who was under indictment for the first-degree murder of Josephine, was still taking place as late as December 1929 by Porter County, Indiana authorities. The December 21, 1929 issue of the Vidette Messenger includes the following statements in a front-page column. When Judge Grant Crumpacker dismissed 95 criminal actions on Friday, December 16th, one case has been pending for more than 4 years without an arrest, was not stricken from the docket. Desiderio, now believed to be in Italy, where he fled, was indicted by a Porter County grand jury for the slaying of his young wife Josephine, aged 22. After extended investigation of the case by Sheriff W.B. Forney and Coroner A.O. Dobbins, the dead woman's body was established as that of Josephine Desiderio, wife of Luis Desiderio, a Chicago and Gary gangster. Because of jealousy and alleged unfaithfulness, Desiderio is alleged to have killed his young wife, mother of his 3 children. Who was Elvira Lozzi, the woman Louis married in 1927? Elvira had emigrated from Naples, Italy, at the age of 23, landing at Boston on February 10, 1921, aboard the SS Canopic. She was single, and she listed her final destination as Everett, Massachusetts. Elvira was born in Aquila, Italy, her father being Feliciano Vittorino Lozzi. It appears that Elvira was commonly referred to as Vera. It is presumed that Louis Desiderio headed to Massachusetts after the murder of his wife Josephine and met Elvira there. Both Louis and Elvira appear in the 1930 federal census enumeration for Everett, Massachusetts. They are listed as Louis and Elvira Desideri. They are living at 12 Harrison Avenue with the Victor and Annie Lozzi family. Louis is shown to be employed in the acid room of a foundry, while Elvira is a machine operator at a dress factory. A city directory for Everett shows that Louis and Elvira were living as 12 Harrison Avenue as early as 1928, shortly after their marriage. Louis and Elvira were still living at 12 Harrison Avenue address in 1932. The 1932 city directory lists Louis' occupation as a painter. In the 1940 federal census for Everett, Massachusetts, the couple appears as Louis and Elvira Desiderio. Louis is shown as being employed as a laborer working on a Works Progress Administration (WPA) sewer project, while Elvira is employed as a machine operator at Sexton Can Company. A search of the Find a Grave database revealed that a record exists for Louis Desiderio. He is buried at Desert Lawn Memorial Park at Calamasa in Riverside County, California.
All right, here it is. You can see why it was so hard to find. Looks to be homemade, just concrete. There's nothing on it. Looks like it might have been right here. Something wrote there once upon a time. But this is it. Definitely in the right section, right spot, right row. Right grave number, right here.
A published death notice indicates that Louis died on December 22, 1979, at Redlands, San Bernardino County, California. Engraved on Louis's tombstone is PVT U.S. Army, World War I. Louis is buried alongside Elvira Lozzi Desiderio, B. March 28, 1898, D. December 25, 1989. Elvira's tombstone is engraved with Beloved Wife. Contemporary reports of Josephine, Gennaro, Desiderio's death mention that she had 3 children with Louis, though the reports did not name these children. A search of birth and census records has led to the identification of all 3 children. Louis's obituary from 1979 specifically mentions 2 children, a Mary Cook of El Monte, Los Angeles County, California, and Carmela of Indiana. These 2 children were indeed the children of Josephine. As reassurance that these are Josephine's children and not Elvira's, neither the 1930 or 1940 federal census data revel that Louis's second wife, Elvira Lozzi Desiderio, had given birth to children. In a morbid but rather important historical twist, The murdered and charred remains of another individual were discovered on January 12, 1941, at nearly the same location where Josephine Desiderio's remains were found in 1925. In this incident, a mulatto girl was believed to have been murdered with a shotgun elsewhere, and her body then dumped at the site, doused with motor oil or gasoline, and then set ablaze. Ira Wampler came across the human remains while walking along the road from his job at McDonald's sawmill near Furnessville. In a January 13, 1941, front-page story concerning this murder, published in the Vidette Messenger, the last paragraph recalls the remarkable similarities to the Desiderio murder more than 16 years earlier. The last sentence of the column states that Louis Desiderio was indicted by a Porter County grand jury of the murder, but he fled to Italy and was never apprehended. Following an extensive search through a variety of public records, it does not appear that Louis Desiderio was ever apprehended and brought to trial at Porter County, Indiana, for the murder of Josephine. A short article about the Desiderio murder published in the August 6, 1925, issue of the Chesterton Tribune states that Porter County Sheriff Forney spent $300 of his own money on the case. He had to quit because of lack of funds. He traced the husband to New York City and there lost the trail. The same article ends with these foretelling sentences. It is possible the murderer will never be brought to justice in this world, but it will not be the fault of Porter County Sheriff. Rather, it will be the fault of our system of justice. Other remarks published in newspapers in 1929 and as late as 1941 revealed that it was believed that Louis had successfully made his way to Italy to avoid prosecution. If that was indeed the working theory of Porter County officials, then there would have been little, if any, effort expended to search for Louis within the United States. Furthermore, the Great Depression, followed by World War II, may have significantly altered the focus and use of police and prosecutorial resources in Porter County, and the Desiderio case simply faded from memory. Surprisingly, every public record uncovered during the research process for this story showed that Louis did not attempt to hide or change his identity after Josephine's death. He did not change his name. His date and location of birth are correctly stated in the records, and records plainly show that he had some interaction with the children that he fathered with Josephine. One is left to wonder if the Desiderio children ever learned about the circumstances surrounding their mother's death, or whether they knew that their father was wanted for the crime of first-degree murder in Porter County, Indiana. What did Elvira, Louis's second wife, know about Josephine? What they did know about Josephine's murder they took to their graves. Authorities in Porter County mistakenly believed that Louis had avoided prosecution by fleeing to Italy. The search for Louis appears to have abruptly ended. Perhaps the Chesterton Tribune was correct in suggesting that Josephine was a victim of murder and a fault of our system of justice.
Alright, there you have it. Horrible story. Too bad he got away with it. But he'll pay the price. Or he is paying the price now, right? Let's hope so. Appreciate you watching the video. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. It really help the channel a lot. Maybe give this thing a share. Shares go a long way. Alright, we'll see you on the next one. Y'all be safe.